Hey guys, I hope you are doing well today. I wanted to record this video and send it out to you guys. One, to answer some of your questions that you asked me. Two, talk about the end of The Great Gatsby, and just kind of check in with you guys with how I'm doing, with how I'm thinking about Gatsby, and then hopefully just kind of get one more contact for us to talk about this novel. Okay, so by now, at the end of today, you should be wrapping up reading The Great Gatsby. I wanted to share with you an infographic that I made a couple years ago. This one was an assignment that I gave my students a few years ago, and this was the one that I created. What I love about this novel, and I've said it before in a previous video, is that it's so close to being perfect. And the reason why it's close to being perfect is the language is really good. The way that Fitzgerald writes, he pulls you into the novel, and it's at least good just to identify that the word choice, the images, the metaphors, the themes, everything that he uses inside of The Great Gatsby is amazing, and really cool to try to replicate as writers. The other reason why this is a near perfect book is to think about the pacing of the novel. Now, there's two ways to when we think about how a story is written. One is the action of the story. That's beginning, the middle, and the end. That whole loop that we look at, or that whole triangle, the plot development structure that we use for stories. That's action. What's happening from the beginning to the middle to the end. That's action. The other way to describe it is the plot, how the author arranges things. Now, art is interesting because it has to be created, right? When you look at a sunset isn't created by anything. It's not arranged in any particular way. And so the arrangement of a sunset is really non-existent. It's just a thing. It can be beautiful, but it's not art. In the same way that, like, bushes, right? Bushes with flowers, that's not art. It's not arranged in any particular way. But when you cut flowers and you put them into a bouquet, well, that begins to be closer to art. Art is about arrangement, how an artist puts the elements together. And so if we think about Gatsby in that way, then we can see that it's arranged in a particular way. It's organized to share something with us, to cause us to reflect. A couple of years ago, when I made this infographic, this is what kind of I was thinking about of how is Fitzgerald arranging this piece. And this is another way that it's perfect. So I have all the chapters here. I'll post this for you guys if you want to look at it a little bit further. We have chapter 1, Hypocrisy, Wealth, and Gatsby. There's kind of a juxtaposition of how we can understand and look at Gatsby and Nick's impressions. Then we have the eyes of God, the drunk, and the untrustworthy. We can't trust anyone inside of this novel, and we have this juxtaposition. These two worlds being clashed together. There's two kinds of worlds of wealth, and then there's like the middle class or the common working people, and Fitzgerald is showing us all of this. And then we have this enigmatic figure, Gatsby, and everyone's asking who he is, or is he even real at all? And these questions surround this character. And then we get to chapter 4, which was one of the questions that one of you guys asked was, I need help understanding and looking at chapter 4. So we have multiple things that are happening inside of Gatsby, right? Multiple things that are happening inside of these first 4 chapters. All of them fit within the impressions of how Nick is understanding New York and Long Island and the kind of the surrounding boroughs. And so we have Nick and Gatsby. Gatsby tells Nick kind of a facade of lies, very closely connected lies that are seemingly true. He has evidence to support them, which goes back to Owl Lies in the previous chapter when he says all the books are real. Everything is constructed together to show that it's real. So then we have the request, right? Gatsby is covering up his lies. He's covering up his story. He requests something of Nick. And then we have that first showdown between Gatsby and Tom. And this isn't going to be the last showdown that we have. And then we have Daisy meeting Gatsby with Nick in between. We have the meetup, that connection that they have. We have clear skies. All of everything is kind of washed away and is purified between Daisy and Gatsby. And then we get to chapter 6, and look at this pacing, right? In 3, we want to know who Gatsby is. In 4, we get Gatsby's lies about who he is. And then we get the first confrontation between Gatsby and Tom. In 5, we get the final meetup and the rekindling of that romantic tryst. In 6, we get the entire story of Gatsby. We get everything we need to know about Gatsby. Then at the end of it, Gatsby's talking to Nick, and Nick says, I wouldn't ask too much of her, I ventured. You can't repeat the past. Can't repeat the past, he said incredulously. Why, of course you can repeat the past. He looked around him wildly, as if the past were lurking here in the shadow of his house, just out of reach of his hand. I'm going to fix everything just the way it was before, he said, nodding determinedly. She'll see. He talked a lot about the past, and I gathered that he wanted to recover something, some idea of himself perhaps, that had gone into loving Daisy. His life had been confused and disordered since then. If he could once return to a certain starting place and go over it all slowly, he could find out what that thing was. ... So we get Gatsby's motivation. What is he trying to do? Everything that he does is an attempt to change and to repeat the past and to build something again. And that thing that he wants to build is that relationship. Now, this is interesting because this fits inside of the themes, one of the themes of The Great Gatsby, that idea of the American dream, that we can build ourselves, we can pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, that we can do whatever we can to fix our lives. For Gatsby, his motivation is Daisy. It has always been Daisy. So if we go back to 3, these elaborate parties that he creates, that's in order to get Daisy's attention. Gatsby asking Nick to hear his story, to arrange this meetup, that's to get to Daisy. He lies to get to Daisy. And then we get this full story. Everything that he's been trying to do, pulling himself up by his own bootstraps, is to get to that moment, to get back Daisy. But you can't repeat the past. You can't repeat the past. Everything he does is to try to get to that point. And then we get to 7. We get the turning point. This is one of my favorite parts of the novel, where you get that it's really hot, it's stanky, everyone is sweaty, and it's awkward. Everything is awkward in here. Fitzgerald does a really good job of expressing mood and expressing tone, and he does this in chapter 7. And this is where we get Tom is beginning to realize, oh my gosh, there's something going on between these two, between Daisy and Gatsby. And he sees Daisy slipping from his grips, and he tries to pull her back. And so he confronts Gatsby at the end of 7. We get the turning point of this, right? So if we're thinking about that plot development structure, right, we're getting closer and closer and closer to the climax, the top of the story, the event that is going to unravel everything else. And what's the event of this? Well, it kind of goes out with a bang, right? Literally, there's a car crash. All of them are involved in this. It all comes to an end. We have that moment of that car crash, and then the rest of the story begins to unravel. It's that idea of attempting to change the past, the nostalgia, that deep longing for something that was, and us attempting to make struggles to achieve it. One of your questions that you asked me was, are Gatsby and Tom going to become enemies? And is Daisy ever going to choose Gatsby? Is there going to be a consequence for Nick for trying to help Gatsby? Well, in this first question, they are by definition going to be enemies. And we see in 7, when they have kind of that moment, they are enemies. Tom sees Daisy responding to Gatsby, and he forces Daisy's hand, and which is fascinating because Tom gets mad because Daisy's having an affair, right? He's having like a side piece, but also Tom does the same thing with Myrtle, and what a terrible name Myrtle is, right? I mean, that's kind of like classic what's the, you guys know the whatever cool phrase is now, but that's his like his side hustle is Myrtle. What a terrible name. Perfect name for a person. Terrible name for a person. Perfect name for a side piece. And there's some hypocrisy there, right? Tom sees Daisy being taken away by Gatsby. He kind of puffs up and gets angry, wants to take her back. And then the car crash and Myrtle gets hit by a car in full irony, that it's Tom's wife that hits and kills Tom's mistress. And now he sees both of his women kind of falling from his grasp, and he does whatever he can to try and get them back to shore, things that are his. And so there is going to be a confrontation. Then we get to 9, and 9 is where we get the final tragedy of The Great Gatsby. And remember that at the beginning of the novel, Fitzgerald writes through Nick that no, it wasn't Gatsby turned out all right in the end. It was what's preyed on Gatsby in the end. And what has preyed on him is this drive and this need to attempt to change the past. We can't do that. I think that we can all have some kind of access to this. For me, it's when I think about like those moments where I wasn't being the best person that I could have been, whether it's being short with my wife or my kids or some of you in the classroom, or even like in past relationships, being like, man, if only I could change that. If only I could go back and fix that thing. Or I wish I could go back to, when I was in middle school, or when I can go back to when I was in elementary and life was so much simpler there. I'm reading this book, The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. It is a beast of a book. But there's something really fascinating. There's two characters, kind of the two main characters, Edmond Dantes and Jay Gatsby, that are so similar to each other. It's crazy. If you don't know the story of Count of Monte Cristo, in the beginning, Edmond Dantes has been falsely arrested without trial, imprisoned for 14 years, and vengeance kind of wells up inside of him. And so he kind of takes the story is about him kind of taking that vengeance out on the people that have wronged him and hurt him. In Gatsby, it's something very similar, that he sees something that he wants to change. He pulls himself up by his own bootstraps and he tries to change it. But at the end of 9, in chapter 9, Fitzgerald writes that this story is not a story about Gatsby. It's a story about wealth, about money, about people not allowing those kind of newcomers of wealth to come in and to be a part of their story. This is a story about the West and the East, literally between West Egg and East Egg, but also between West and Middle America and the East Coast. That kind of haven for old money that doesn't allow new people to come in to kind of live their lives. And this is where we get that broader view that Fitzgerald is trying to respond to. This is what makes Gatsby so worthwhile. We're all Gatsby in one way or another. That we try to change the past. We desperately try to do it, and it just doesn't work. And also that we can all find those moments where we try to enter into a new group of friends, enter into a new school, enter into a new place. And we try to show other people that we can be a part of that. We can find something worthwhile. And then those people that just kind of leave us. And then we get the last lines of this novel that are some of the most famous last lines kind of in all of literature. Gatsby's dead. Spoiler, Gatsby's dead. He gets shot in the pool by Myrtle's husband because Tom lies to George and tells him that Gatsby was driving the car that killed his wife. No one has shown up to Gatsby's funeral. And how wouldn't you expect that for a crook like Gatsby to die like that and to kind of live his life as a lie, for no one to show up at your funeral? The last three paragraphs of Great Gatsby. And as I sat there brooding on the old unknown world, I thought of Gatsby's wonder when he first picked out the green light at the end of Daisy's dock. He had come a long way to this blue lawn, and his dream must have seemed so close that he could hardly fail to grasp it. He did not know that it was already behind him somewhere. I lost my spot. Somewhere back in the vast obscurity beyond the city, where the dark fields of the Republic rolled on under the night. A dream that he had lost that he tried to pursue. That's good. Gatsby believed in the green light. There's that green light again, right? We talked about that the other day, that this becomes a symbol of that longing and pursuit of that dream that we have, but we can't quite get it. The orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eludes us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and one fine morning dash until one fine morning we die. We desperately try to waste and pine and to pursue those dreams that we are never going to have, that we're never going to reach. So we beat on current boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. And there's those boats again, right? We saw those boats in that scene where Gatsby is kind of holding on to that time during that meetup with the section of the movie that we watched, but also it's those boats, because it's the boat that Gatsby realizes his own story. He realizes his own future, right? Kind of pursuing whatever he can to get that dream that we have. And this is what makes this novel, I think, lasting. Why do English teachers force their juniors to read this novel? Is because it's true in a sense that these themes are universal, that we struggle so hard to achieve those dreams, to change the past, to reunite ourselves with those things that we have lost. We desperately try to do it. And so to answer kind of the few questions that I got, are Gatsby and Tom going? Yes, they are going to be enemies because they're after the same woman. Is Daisy ever going to choose Gatsby? She does, and then she doesn't. Why doesn't she go back with Gatsby? I think because she knows with Tom she can find that self-preservation that she needs. She's smart enough to preserve herself. I lost a signal, and there's another question I wanted to look at. I need permission for this. Excellent. And then to think about the end of this novel, right? No one does. Oh, it was. Is Nick ever going to face the consequences of that? I think knowing Gatsby, experiencing the death of that, being one of only a few people at his funeral, that's the consequence that he has. And also, this story is the consequence that Nick has. He has to tell this tragedy in a way for us to connect with that. Okay, so those are my thoughts on the end of the novel, the pacing of this, why this is so perfect. Finish reading it. Come into office hours tomorrow if you want to talk about the novel in lieu of your quiz, or otherwise take the reading quiz. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Feel free to ask more questions. I'll try to answer some of those questions as they come in. You guys are awesome. As always, happy reading.